Anything else as far as Indiana, Don, that you want to bring up as far as keys to this game on Saturday? I know we've kind of been all over the place. And if anybody does want to call in here in the last few minutes of our show, you're welcome to 860-499-3332. But is there anything else that, in particular, that stands out as far as a key for Iowa to have success week one?
Well, I would say the single biggest key would be turnover margin. It's not going to be easy to win on turnovers against Indiana because they've shown that they're also good and fundamentally sound in the area of turnovers. If we could just be +1 even, I think that would make a difference. As I mentioned last year, there were 18 games out of 50 that were 7-point differential or less. And obviously, you would expect this is going to be a close game. May come down to the last possession of the game. If we can be +1 or better yet +2, even +1 this year. I don't have my notes in front of me, but even +1 was it was around 90% maybe. +1 was like 90% win. And overall, it was 88% win, 35-5. That's pretty amazing for one parameter to be that reliable and predicting a winner. So if I could do two things, I'd win on turnovers and I would have more rushing yards than the opponent. Because I do know that combination last year was 100% win. Win on turnovers, outrush your opponent, you won 100% of the time. Your record, I believe, was 28-0.
My season predictions, Don, here as we head out. And I'll just say it. I know this is going to sound like a homer. I do think Iowa is going to win the West this year. I question my biggest question all around, I think, is just depth. It seems like Iowa does, with the exception being, I think, wide receiver. It seems like they've developed a good amount of depth. And defensive back, I think they've got plenty of depth. But I question depth at tight end. I question depth at running back. I question depth, certainly, obviously, at quarterback. And probably both sides of the line at linebacker as well. I think Iowa is very dependent, as they are every year, and I think every college football team would claim this, but I think they're going to be very dependent on health, just everywhere. Sam Laporta goes down. Now Luke Lachey or Josiah Meeman, who we've never really seen in game action. They're your number one tight ends. Jack Campbell, Seth Benson, those two guys, we saw what happened early last year against Purdue and Northwestern when those linebackers went down. And I think you could argue if they played, this might have been an 8-0 football team last year. So I do think, again, pending health, Iowa has an excellent chance at winning the West this year. Your thoughts on that? I know you're probably not real big into season predictions, Don, but your thoughts on that?
Well, I do think the teams that typically are playing for the championship, now maybe Ohio State's in a different category because I think their depth is better than anyone else, any single team in the Big Ten. Their backups in some cases are better than other teams within the conference. But I do think the teams in general that are playing for that, put it this way, the teams that win the West, probably year in and year out, would be a little luckier than the average team in terms of injuries. It's unrealistic that you're going to get to play with the same lineup all season because injuries are part of the game. We all know that. But that's why it's so critical for those backups to be ready. Now, maybe they're not ready in game one, but maybe they're not needed in game one. Maybe you're able to actually bring them along, and maybe they're not needed for another month. Maybe it's mid-season when you actually need that guy to step in and play. I'll give you a prime example. Way back in time, I had the privilege of coaching a great receiver by the name of Dana Hughes. And maybe you're old enough to remember Dana. And he ended up playing, I believe, 7 or 8 years for the Chargers. I'm sorry, for the Chiefs.
Chiefs, yep.
Kansas City Chiefs. He's doing radio for the Chiefs now. And anyway, we were playing Wisconsin here in Kinnick. And on that day, Dana became the all-time leading receiver in terms of receptions on that very day. It was against the Barry Alvarez coach team. The rest of the story is that Dana got injured in the third quarter of that game, and the backup went in. There wasn't anybody in Kinnick Stadium that knew who the backup was. The only people that knew were the players and coaches. His name was Anthony Dean, and a lot of people still don't know that much about Anthony Dean, but he was a hero that day because late in the game, we came from behind to beat him, and Anthony Dean caught 2 or 3 passes on the last drive, and it was a game-winning drive at the end of the game. Down the goal line on 4th and goal at the 3, he caught the touchdown pass to put us down by 1, and then he caught the 2-point play to win the game. And he was a backup going into the game that had really hardly been on the field at all. That's a great example of a guy being ready to play. The backup quarterback for Illinois today was ready to play, and he went out and proved it. Anthony Dean proved the same thing. So the good news is maybe the guy that's not quite ready for next weekend, maybe he doesn't have to play when the game's on the line. Maybe we're lucky enough to win by a couple of touchdowns, and maybe he gets to play the last series of the game and get his feet wet. And maybe he's not really needed for another three weeks. And in the meantime, of course, those coaches are getting him better and better prepared to get in there and play. And my hope is that he's not required to play before he's ready to play. And but there's no doubt you got to be a little lucky on injuries, and we'll keep our fingers crossed. And of course, the best way to be lucky on injuries is to have superior conditioning, to be in great shape. You know, fatigue makes cowards of us all, and if you're tired and you're going less than full speed, you're a little more susceptible to injury. So let's hope that we don't have any of those issues, not just this next weekend, but going forward too.
And to kind of cap this all off, Don, my biggest concern would have to be probably quarterback. Obviously, Spencer improved as we went through the year last year, and the position that I'm most comfortable with right now is defensive back, and it's because of this simple fact. We know Phil Parker, and I'm sure you have insight as to why Phil has this philosophy, but he doesn't like to. We saw it with Desmond King, we saw it with Josh Jackson. He doesn't like to throw defensive backs. If he's got a defensive back that takes one side of the field, he usually likes to keep him to that side of the field. He doesn't usually like to switch him around. And I think Iowa has had at times has had problems defending big plays. Not often, of course. Phil Parker's excellent at doing so. But I think this year, with having two defensive backs who I view as almost equals, Matt Hankins and Riley Moss, and I think some depth with Jamari Harris and Terry Roberts, that is no longer an issue, at least, again, pending health. We know cornerbacks tend to get sort of beat up at Iowa, especially early on in the season, it seems like. But that would probably be my position of strength at this point. Do you have any thoughts? Your position of strength, maybe your position of concern?
I agree with you. I think as a whole, those four defensive backs positions, or let's talk about five even, talk about the cash position, because we're going to end up playing the equivalent of a lot of nickel defense against a lot of these spread offenses. It'll be only six guys in the box, if you will, and our cash defender, our what we used to call our nickel defender, he's going to be on the field a lot, and all five of those guys have a lot of game experience already, with just a little bit of luck. And like you say, I used to say this: I don't care if he is an all-conference corner. We only have one football, so why don't we put our best guy against their weakest corner? Let's do that. Let's make a point of doing that. There was a team that did that to us a couple of years ago by the name of Purdue. I don't know if you remember the game. It was in Kinnick.
Oh, yeah.
To start the second half, and I give Jeff Brom a lot of credit. He came out in the second half, and if I'm not mistaken, he threw the ball to their best receiver, who lined up into the boundary. They threw to him something like 5 out of 6 snaps. I'm talking about 5 or 6 plays in a row, and that maybe there was one snap in there that was a run. The result
different cornerbacks too, right? Different cornerbacks.
You might be right. The result of it was 2 touchdowns. I do remember that. I also remember that after the first touchdown, Phil put in the backup corner, and Purdue took advantage of him also. But Phil's next solution was to take that all-conference corner that had been playing on the wide field, and from that point forward, that cornerback went with that star receiver, and that pretty much ended the mismatch. But in the meantime, of course, they'd scored 2 touchdowns and they won the game.
Anthony Mahungo.
So smart football. It's not enough to have one good corner, because the other guy is just going to get worn out with the football. They're going to throw his way.
Yeah, Anthony Mahungu. That was the wide receiver that continued to burn Iowa in that game, and I do remember that. So Phil has shown he's willing to make adjustments, but I really do think those with Riley and Matt Hankins, they can stay healthy. It's going to anchor a very strong secondary. And then, of course, Jack Kerner, you mentioned Dane Belton at cash, Kayvon Merriweather, and then hopefully some depth will emerge there as well. Don, it has been a privilege. We look forward to talking with you all season long, following each and every game. For anybody who is, again, new to this channel, subscribe here, Iowa at the voice of college football, Iowa at the voice of CFB. We are going to be coming to you after every Iowa game and giving you the breakdown. Hopefully a lot of Iowa wins, Don.
That sounds good. One other comment about those DBs, and I had a chance to congratulate those guys recently. They're a little unusual in this regard. They all actually have good hands. if we get our hands on it, we typically hang on to it. That's one reason we've been one of the best teams in college football in terms of interceptions. Now, the area that we can improve, we can do a better job as a defensive unit at forcing fumbles. I would say we're only more average in terms of forcing fumbles. We're definitely above average in making interceptions. If we have a chance to get our hands on the ball, we're probably going to hang on to it. That's how well those guys catch.
And fully expect Phil Parker to have these guys ready for week 1 as he does each and every year. So we appreciate the time, Don, and we'll talk to you next Saturday.
That sounds good, Corey. I look forward to it.
All right, Corey Brada from the Hawkeye of the Storm for Don Patterson here at Iowa at the voice of CFB.